Os dois próximos convidados são, de facto, inspiradores. Ele tem um projeto para ajudar jovens, muito jovens, a desenvolverem as suas potencialidades, tecnologia, inteligência artificial, o que vocês queiram. Ela é uma jovem brilhante, também é um resultado desta experiência que vamos conhecer, tem apenas 17 anos. A partir de agora vou falar inglês, porque os nossos convidados estão longe e são internacionais. Let me introduce you Nadim Natou. Nadim, welcome to this conference. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I wish I could be there with you in person.
Next time. The sunshine is amazing. Just to tease you. Anyway, okay. And Anupra Chandra, welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks so much for having me.
And next time, you both invited and be here with me in Lisbon, and we have good food, see whatever you want, okay? Okay, we are talking here, talking about the future, inspiring future, new generations. What's going to be the future? It's $1 million question, right? But Nadim, let's start to know TakeES. What's TakeES?
So the way that I'll describe TKS is, imagine you wanted to compete for the Olympics. You don't turn 22 one day and go, you know what? I want to train for the Olympics one day.
Okay.
You start young and, you train, and then one day you hopefully win the gold medal and you really compete. But what about young people who want to be Olympic level CEOs, innovators, thought leaders, researchers? What institution do they go to put in those 10,000 hours? And that's what TKS is meant to be, right? It's meant to be the institution where young people can go foster their curiosity and train them on how to use emerging technologies to solve really important problems in the world. And imagine if the Olympics didn't exist. How many 14-year-olds would wake up one day and just think, you know what? I want to be really fast in the water. Very few people would think that way. And so TKS provides the institution where young people can go into, and again, really train specifically to solve really important problems in the world.
So how many young people did you help with this project? Do you have any idea? I mean, in a direct way or indirect way?
Absolutely. So we've had over 1,500 people from around the world, young people between the ages of 13 to 17, go through the program. And they're working on things like curing disease, starting companies, but most importantly, working on things that will help advance society and help create an exciting future for everybody.
We are talking about teenagers or young adults. What kind of youth are we talking about?
Yeah, so these students are 13 to 17 years old.
13.
Right? So oftentimes they'll come into TKS not even knowing how to code. And within a year or two, like I mentioned, one of our students cured a disease called muscular dystrophy in mouse models. And we just heard word a couple weeks ago that they're on human trials. And Anupra, who's on this call, you'll see she joined the program at 14 and working on some really, really incredible things right now that I think you would not expect from a 17-year-old to be working on.
Let's go to Anupra. Anupra, you are 17 right now?
Yep, 17.
17. When did you start to know that you are, of course, a smart girl and you decided to want to change the world? Because that's what you want. I mean, you want to save the planet. You want to save people with Alzheimer's. When did you realize that?
Yeah, for sure. I actually, for most of my life, kind of envisioned myself making a big impact and trying to add to what's already in the world. But when I first started in TKS, I didn't really know too much about technology. I was actually mainly really focused on school. I really enjoyed learning about math and science and English. And I was also doing a lot of social justice fundraisers, like for homeless shelters. But I didn't really know too much about tech and how that could be used to solve major problems. So I think the main thing that TKS did that I think really flipped that around was exposing me to this mindset of exploration and trying to understand these technologies even if they haven't been around for too long. I think when most people think of exploration, they think of oh, let me just read about all these different technologies and then choose the one that I'm the most passionate about and then dedicate the rest of my life to that. But through TKS, they did it a little bit differently. We actually explored a bunch of different technologies at a deeper level than just reading about them.
Like what, for instance?
In each
For us to
technology that
understand.
we did a focus in.
Sorry, like what? For us to understand, what kind of technology, different ways?
Yeah, for sure. There's so many different technologies that we go over in TKS. There's artificial intelligence and machine learning. Everything from that, where you can very tangibly code something on your computer, to something like nanotechnology, which is the study of technologies at the scale of atoms and molecules. And that has to do a lot with materials chemistry. And that's related to some of the projects that I'm working on. So basically within the program, you're not just learning, but you're learning how to code and build projects, or how to create proposals for novel ideas that just aren't, that nobody's working on. And yeah, by doing that, you're building kind of this deeper foundation in all these different technologies, and not just having the knowledge, but the skills to use them to solve important problems.
We have a lot of people right now watching and hear you, and perhaps there is a young girl thinking, I would love to be like her. Does this teenager need to be bright minds to be like you?
It depends on what you mean by bright minds.
Smart, intelligence.
I think what's probably the most important is being able to put in the work and be hardworking. Obviously, if you're trying to make a proposal for something that no one's really worked on before, like with me, I've just recently started a project to create a way to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere using nanotechnology, like I was talking about, and turning it into graphene, which is a really important material for electronics. To work on something like that, you need to be able to dedicate a lot of time and have it be a top priority. I think the other quality you need to have, other than hardworkingness, is also just an ability to think differently and look at what already exists and see how can I combine ideas in new ways, or do things that don't already exist yet, trying to be unconventional from what already exists. I think those two are probably the most important to be able to work in the tech field. But in terms of smartness or intelligence, I think it can definitely be helpful. But as long as you have the drive and the ability to think differently, I think that's what's really going to get you far.
Nadim, let me get back to you again. How do you select these young people to learn and to be different, to have a different way of life and learning and work? How is the selection made?
That's a good question. So we don't care about grades. We don't care about age, school. It's all a blind application. We really care about three things. The first is curiosity. So we don't want someone ever since who was 9 years old who has wanted to be a doctor and that's all they've ever wanted to be, right? Because there's a clear path for that. You don't need TCAS. We want people who love learning. They understand they don't know what they don't know and want to get a better understanding of the world. The second thing we look for is ambition. And you don't have to be thinking right now about solving billion-dollar problems or improving the lives of billions of people, but are you thinking outside of your town? Are you thinking outside of your city? Just thinking bigger versus smaller. And then the third is work ethic. And as long as you have two of the three, you're going to be a good fit for TCAS. So there's an application and an interview process, but it really just is about assessing, are you doing this for the right reasons? And do you have some of these foundational mindsets that we can help tease out and train on top of?
Nadim, when we are young, I mean, a long time ago I was young, we really don't know what we want and what we can achieve. Probably you lead with a lot of young people that they really don't know what's going to be their future. How do you direct them to the right field or the right thing to do?
It's funny because this isn't a young people problem, right? This is an everyone problem.
For sure.
I would expect that most people right now haven't figured out what they're passionate about in the world, and that's a lifelong process. But at TKS, I really dislike using this term, finding your passion, because it almost seems like you're walking around and you see your passion on the floor and you pick it up and put it in your pocket. And you're like, I found my passion. That's not really how it works, right? It's not love at first sight. It's more like developing your best friend. So imagine meeting your best friend for the first time. You might not even like them at first, but you go through some laughs, some cries. Maybe you climb a mountain together. And 2 years later, you wake up and you're like, you're my best friend. Right? And so that's really what developing your passion is like, is how can you go really deep into a particular topic? How can you build something? How can you struggle? How can you follow your curiosity? How can you work on it with other people? How can you discover your why around it? Once you do all those things, you will identify with something. And how can you do that very quickly and iterate? So say you go really deep into AI, for example, and you built a bunch of projects. At the end of the day, you're like, you know what? This isn't something I'm super excited about. That's okay. You spent 4 months on that. Go do something else, right? And that's what the learning journey should be. It should not be the same people in the same room learning the same thing in the same way, right? And so TCAS really takes a different approach in terms of how we mine human potential and how we support the learning journey in young people.
Are you reinventing the education that we know?
I mean, that's the goal, right? When we think about education, we have to ask ourselves, what is our definition of education and what does this mean, right? For me, at the end of the day, what I believe is that human potential is the most valuable resource we have as a civilization. It's not gold, it's not oil, it's people. And right now, we're not doing a good job mining this resource of human potential globally. And we've seen this through TKS, that young people are able to accomplish so much more and do so much more and feel so much, have a lot more autonomy far earlier on in life. And so our goal is to figure out how we can scale this around the world and provide as many young people the opportunities in different environments to learn and maximize their potential, again, and maximize their probability for success versus what I think we're doing in our traditional education system, which is mitigating risk. Right? How can you not screw up is almost the attitude versus how can we really make sure that we can maximize the probability that you reach your potential.
Anupra joins us right now again. Tell us, what are you doing right now? What kind of work, investigation? I read something that you want to fight Alzheimer's disease and save the planet. It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely big goals that TKS really helped me have the ability to even think about. But right now, I'm someone who's just really interested in big existential problems of the world, like climate change and saving the planet, like you said, and diseases related to aging, like Alzheimer's, which is a little bit ironic because, like I said, I'm only 17. I haven't really aged much, and I've been using that joke since I was 15. Hopefully I can use it for a lot longer too. But there are two main projects that I'm actually working on right now. The first one is a test to be able to detect molecules related to aging in the saliva. So you can kind of think of it as almost like a pregnancy test, and it kind of uses similar technology, but instead of testing for pregnancy, it's testing for molecules related to the damage that your cells incur over time due to aging. And that damage can actually be an indicator for whether you're likely to have diseases like Alzheimer's and even heart disease, some of the largest causes of death in the world that are related to aging. So it can do that, and it can also just let you know more about what your health is like at the cellular level at a speed of within minutes rather than the weeks, I mean, maybe not the weeks, but the hours and days you might need to get a sample from a lab. The other project that I'm working on within climate and saving the planet is finding a way to reverse the greenhouse gas emissions that are currently leading to climate change. Right now, there's a lot of focus on trying to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but I'm working on a research proposal to be able to turn carbon dioxide into an actual resource. So we're looking at how to turn carbon dioxide into graphene, which, like I said, is a material that can be used in a bunch of electronics. So yeah, those are my main two focuses for the moment.
Anupra, the pandemic changed us all, of course. In what way this pandemic is affecting you in a good way, in a way that you could use your work to fight the pandemic, to help the world in a different way?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting how you say looking at the pandemic in a more positive way, because although this pandemic has caused so much damage to the world, it's really given me a lot of time to follow my curiosity beyond just what I was looking at before. Like I said, before the pandemic, I was focused on Alzheimer's, and that kind of morphed into the startup with the aging test that I'm working on with my friends. But I was able to really, throughout the pandemic, just kind of think about the world around me, the technologies we have, and kind of do that just for the sake of it. Because I think a lot of the times people only research into something if they need to use it for an existing project. But there is value in just looking at things out of curiosity. And the pandemic has given me more time to be able to do that. So, for example, one day I was literally just thinking about, hey, how exactly do pregnancy tests even work? Something as simple as that. And after looking into it, that's kind of what led to the idea for the aging test at the startup that I'm working on with my friends. So even though it didn't seem like it was going to lead anywhere when I was just thinking about it at the beginning of the pandemic, it ended up having a big impact on the project that I was working on. So I think the biggest change was probably just more time to follow my curiosity.
Nadim, the same questions. I mean, the pandemic changed the way that your approach to the young people that you work with, or changed the goals that some of them had before the pandemic?
Well, the good thing about the pandemic actually is that it was a forcing function for us to include students from all around the world, right? Historically, TKS was American and Canada and the US. And we had to build very quickly a fully virtual program to support students everywhere. So now we have students from over 30 countries, right? And we have students from Russia and Texas connecting with each other on building, compact nuclear reactors, as an example, if that's something that they're really about. People who speak different languages, different cultures, and also to stimulate collaboration from a lot of these young people from around the world. So I think that was the biggest way in which it changed for us. And then the other thing was really challenging us on how to create a really amazing learning environment virtually, which I don't think really has been done yet. If you look at some of these online courses or MOOCs like Udacity, Coursera, they have around 4% completion rates, but they have amazing content. So they haven't really figured out a way to engage people, but they're still multi-billion-dollar companies, right? And so for us, it was really about focusing on the experience and focusing on growth and focusing on outcomes. And we've seen just as great outcomes this year, again, from people all around the world, fully virtually, that we did in the in-person program. So that gives us a lot of confidence to figure out how we can keep supporting people virtually all over the world.
How do you establish the link between these young boys and girls and the rest of the world and the companies? I mean, the future.
That's a really good question. And so everybody who's on this call and you're working at a company, there are a lot of ways to collaborate with TKS. I mean, our students right now are interning at places like Microsoft, IBM, leading startups in the region. They're receiving mentorship at, companies like Apple, SpaceX, Tesla, really cool research institutions like the people who discovered new gene editing technology, Jennifer Doudna, George Church. And so there's a lot of different ways to get involved in terms of working with companies on solving some of their really important problems. We do something called challenges, where we work with companies on their business priorities, and our students spend 4 weeks on figuring out how to solve them. And we've done it with companies like Airbnb, Lego, a lot of different ones that are fairly interesting. So what I would say is if you are figuring out how to inject a lot of young energy and curious minds and really, really capable and sharp young people that you wouldn't really recognize as a high school student, definitely feel free to reach out and we'll figure out a way to work together.
Anupra, we are talking here about the future, and everybody's talking about ethics and human behavior and the technology more human. Aren't you afraid that your discoveries in the future, your work, could be used in a bad way, I mean, for harming people. Do you think about that? How can you avoid that your great discovery could be damage to make damage to someone?
I actually have been thinking about that a lot more, especially recently as we start to see more of the negative effects of technology. Even with things as simple as media, it seems like something harmless at first, but then is leading to all this distraction and all of this unhealthy comparison to each other. And I think about that a lot with the technologies that I work with. Although I think the main way I try to combat that is by using the technologies that I'm working on specifically to be able to reverse these big existential problems. So when it comes to things like reversing climate change, a lot of the technologies that I'm using involve concepts that have been around for a while. I'm just kind of combining them in this new way to be able to solve this new problem. I think it gets a little more complicated when it comes to aging because a lot of people, when they hear the reversal of aging, that brings up a lot of questions like if we were to reverse the damage that happens as we age, what happens if people are living longer? How do we deal with the effects of that? How do we deal with dealing with more people that are living for longer? Is this even something that we should do? And I guess the way I look at that specifically for aging is that I'm not really focused on trying to increase people's lifespans to 1,000 years. I'm more focused on how can we just prevent the diseases related to aging or that are caused by aging, like Alzheimer's, so that maybe people still only live for about 100 years, but they live a healthier life during that time. So I think the question of preventing the negative effects of technology is something that'll always be there. We'll kind of just have to dedicate a lot of time to anticipating what the negative effects of these new technologies are. But my main approach is just focusing on how we can solve problems with it rather than just develop the technology for technology's sake.
With your age, probably you are using a lot of social media. Is it a real thing, important thing for your generation? Is overrated, or it's something that starts to be very dangerous and we have to be very cautious? What are your thoughts about it?
I honestly think it's all three. You could argue either side. I think it's definitely helped me quite a bit, like connecting with people across the world. That's something that we weren't able to do before social media, and I think that's brought a lot of good. It's a little bit difficult to calculate how much of it is good and how much of it is bad because stress levels and the levels of mental illness are rising so much. And I think a big part of that is the fact that we're constantly comparing ourselves to each other using social media, and that the distraction from this technology is almost taking over our lives in certain aspects. I actually I interned with a startup working with reducing chronic stress using wearable technology. And that really opened my eyes to how much stress impacts us, because we think of stress as just a normal thing, but we've gotten to the point where we need to make technologies to help reduce the stress because of how much we feel just during our normal lives. And social media is a big contributor to that. So obviously I've kind of outlined the good effects and the bad effects, but I think the biggest thing is trying to figure out, instead of just making the platform for social media and seeing what people do with it, I think there needs to be more emphasis on actually figuring out what makes a healthy community, kind of like what Nadim was talking about. For example, with TKS, we use Slack, which is a platform that could kind of be thought of as TKS's social media because we share all kinds of content on there. You can message people. It's very connected. But TKS was very intentional at the beginning about how we treat each other, what kind of conversations we have, all of that. Like, for example, being able to share ideas with each other. Obviously, that's harder to regulate on a larger scale, but I think being very intentional about the community that we want to create and creating some sort of social contract is one way that we can, I guess, make sure social media keeps its good effects of connecting people, but doesn't create as much stress as it's creating right now.
Nadim, this pandemic, one of the words of this pandemic, it's what's going to happen to the world. Is it the gap between rich and poor even bigger or not? My question is, in TKS, how could you avoid this? How could you help a young girl or a young boy, the hand of the world, they don't have money, they have skills, they are bright, and they want to succeed? How can you help them?
Yeah, the first thing I would say in terms of students who get involved with TKS is we take in anyone who is the right fit. So we provide up to 100% of tuition support, and that's another way that companies can actually get involved. If you want, we look for some of the most high potential and brightest young people, curious, bright people in the world, and we want to make sure we can support them from whatever environment that they come from. And so if companies are interested in also helping support, that would be very helpful. But the thing to note is that technology is supposed to help improve a lot of these outcomes and situations for people. So if you think about just by having access to the internet, you have 99% of the same information that I have and that Elon Musk has, right? And so historically, 30 years ago, you had to go to the best university because you have the best professors and you have the best resources and libraries. Whereas today, we have content that's available everywhere. Young people are able to learn. And so the idea is that this technology should be able to improve learning outcomes for people everywhere. And the goal in TKS is for young people to develop solutions to help people all over the world. But specifically in terms of getting young people involved, there is no barrier for people to access TKS right now.
We are talking about young people. I mean, they are teenagers, they are almost kids, some of them. They need to have fun, to have, to do the things they used to do. How can you manage these two things? I mean, work hard and have fun in TKS.
What a lot of people don't understand, and you can ask Anupra this, is that this kind of stuff is fun. So a lot of people might play sports and athletics, and that's fun for them. A lot of people might go into music, and that's really fun for them. But there are a lot of people who are insatiably curious and love solving problems, right? There are people who play chess and video games that are indicators of that. And applying that type of mentality to, again, solving these types of problems and learning is also really fun for people. And so I think that's a misconception that the world has. We're not forcing anyone to do anything. We don't have homework at TKS. The reason why they spend 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 hours a week on the stuff that they're doing is because it's self-driven, right? There's no, we don't grade people in TKS either. So it's like, really, what are you doing it for? And you're doing it for yourself, and you're doing it for the curiosity and to solve some of these tough problems that really help a lot of people. And I think for a lot of young people today, that feeling of fulfillment that they've gotten a taste of early on is the thing that drives them. Whereas a lot of us wait till we're 22, 25, 30 to give ourselves the permission to be able to feel this way and act this way. Whereas a lot of young people are like, no, and they're still having fun. They're hanging out with friends and doing a lot of that stuff, but get a lot of the fulfillment and joy on working on things that they actually care about.
Anupra, with all the things that you are talking and saying that you are doing and working and study, do you have time to have fun? What do you do to have fun among all those things?
Yeah, I totally have time to have fun. I think Nadim pretty much hit the nail on the head when it comes to how tech just is fun. It's fun to read about all these cool advancements in biotech and climate change and how we're trying to prevent that. But I think it is really important to have diverse interests and like all kinds of things that you do for enjoyment. So I really enjoy music. I pretty much always have my AirPods in my ears. I listen to pretty much everything. I really like 80s synth pop music specifically, but I also like classical. I've been playing the violin for around 5 years, and before that I played the piano for 5 years. So music has been a pretty big part of my life for a while. I also think music is a place kind of like TKS where you can almost have this community of people. I think it connects people on a level that not many things do, whether you're in an orchestra or you're just able to talk about popular music with your friends. So I think that's probably one of the main other things that I do outside of tech.
Nadim, I have a question from someone from our audience. They ask if they can do 100% TKS remotely, and how could they combine TKS knowledge with high school?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can 100% do TKS remotely. We have a fully virtual program right now. And the whole point of TKS, it should augment and supplement high school. So the analogy that I use is, again, say you want to be an Olympic level swimmer, or say you want to play for, the NBA, so basketball, or, La Liga, or whatever the case it is. You don't go to gym class at school and feel like that training is enough, right? And so TKS isn't necessarily for everybody. It is for people who want to, accelerate their potential and solve really important problems in the world. And we will help support you to take a lot of the stuff that you're learning in school, unlimit yourself and help take you to the next level. But yes, it can be done fully virtual.
Anupra, last question, 1 minute. What's your biggest dream?
My biggest dream, like I said, is to just be able to solve some of these big existential problems. I think a lot about if something were to go completely wrong, what would it be? And I think one of the biggest ones is climate change and, of course, aging, because I think it underlies a lot of the biggest diseases that are happening right now. I think my biggest dream is to be able to not just solve these problems, but prevent them from coming back again through technology, because I think it'll definitely be a combination of different technologies and different policies to allocate the resources to be able to solve these problems. But ultimately, I think it is a technological problem to be able to take carbon dioxide out of the air affordably, or to be able to have affordable solar energy so we don't have to use fossil fuel. So I guess when I think about my vision for the world, it's a world where we can not just solve, but prevent a lot of these big existential problems.
Anupra, it was a really pleasure to talk to you. And by the way, I wish you all the best in the world. And we all are looking at you and hoping that you help to save the world, okay? Anupra, Nadim, thank you so much. And next time, come to Portugal. You are very welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye. Foram dois testemunhos, de facto, inspiradores. Estávamos à procura de uma inspiração.
Com 17 anos.
No futuro.
Extraordinário.
Com 13, e começou aos 13, não é?
Fabuloso.
E vamos fazer aqui um break, um intervalo nesta conferência.
1 hora apenas.
1 hora.
Uma hora. Chega para um almoço e depois regresse connosco. Não se esqueça que tem sempre uma plataforma ao seu dispor, Made in Portugal, ainda para mais, com muitas valências. E por isso mesmo pode visitar os stands virtuais, entrar no chat e colocar questões aos nossos convidados. Até já.
Convidado para o almoço, provavelmente em sua casa. Nós almoçamos por aqui. Até já.
Até já.